"Don't open that door." Grant Whitmore said it too fast, too sharp, too afraid. Nathan Cole turned slowly, the old brass key already in his hand. Ranger stood at the top of the basement stairs, ears forward, eyes locked on the banker like he recognized something rotten beneath the polished shoes and perfect coat. "Funny," Nathan said quietly. "My father told me the opposite." The county officer lowered her clipboard. The contractors stopped moving. Grant swallowed once. Behind that sealed door was not junk, not tools, not family clutter. It was the one thing powerful men fear more than poverty, a record. Nathan Cole had learned over the years that silence could be heavier than noise. It could settle on a man's shoulders in the middle of the night, sit beside him at the kitchen table, ride with him through long stretches of empty highway, and wait for him in the corners of rooms where the people he loved used to breathe. But that morning in Millstone, Pennsylvania, the silence outside Cole & Sons Repair Hall felt different. It was not the silence of memory. It was the silence before something was taken forever. The November wind slid down Franklin Avenue with a cold, patient cruelty, pushing dead leaves against the curb and rattling the loose tin sign above the old brick building. The sign had been painted by Nathan's grandfather in 1978, back when men still came in with busted carburetors, cracked radiator hoses, broken furnace motors, and hands blackened by honest work. Cole & Sons Repair Hall. It said in fading white letters, though there had not been sons behind those doors for a long time. There was only Nathan now. Nathan Cole, 42 years old, former U.S. Army combat engineer, 6 feet tall with a narrow scar beneath his chin, tired gray eyes, and the kind of stillness people mistook for strength because they did not know what else to call it. He stood on the sidewalk with one duffel bag at his feet and a cardboard box in his arms, staring at the building as if staring hard enough might make time hesitate. In the box were the remains of a life reduced to whatever could be carried. His father's socket wrench wrapped in an oily rag, a framed photograph of Thomas Cole in front of the shop on its opening day, a folded American flag from Nathan's last deployment ceremony, and a chipped coffee mug that said "Best Dad in Millstone," though his father had always laughed at it and said the competition must have been thin that year. Beside Nathan stood Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd, with a dark sable coat, a silvering muzzle and amber eyes that seemed too knowing for any animal born without words. Ranger's leash hung loose in Nathan's hand, unnecessary but familiar. The dog did not pull toward the street or nose at the box. He stood facing the repair hall, ears forward, body quiet, as if he understood that this was not an errand. This was a goodbye. At 10:03 a.m., Nathan checked the foreclosure notice again. Even though he had already read it so many times, the words had carved themselves into him. By noon, possession of the property would transfer to Northbridge Community Bank. At 12:15, a locksmith would change the front and rear locks. At 1, Stoneway Development's contractors were scheduled to begin interior clearing for demolition review. Demolition review, Nathan muttered, tasting the phrase with a bitter little smile. People had learned how to make destruction sound professional. Across the street, the new condos on Ridley Corner glared back at him with black windows and clean balconies, the kind of building that looked expensive before it looked lived in. Millstone had changed that way over the last 5 years. The bakery became a leasing office. The Union Hall became a boutique gym. The old hardware store became a wine bar where no one with sawdust on his boots would ever feel welcome. And now they wanted Cole & Sons too. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. Its red bricks were weathered, its gutters sagged, and one of the second-floor windows had been boarded up since the hailstorm 2 springs ago. But it sat on a corner lot near the freight tracks, and in a town being polished for strangers, land mattered more than memory. Nathan shifted the box against his chest as an ache opened beneath his ribs. His father had died 3 years earlier, after a slow illness that had eaten through savings, pride, and finally breath. Nathan had signed the refinance papers in 2023 because the hospital bills did not care that Thomas Cole had repaired half the town's boilers for free during bad winters. They did not care that he had kept veterans' trucks running without sending invoices, or that he let widowers pay in tomatoes, spare lumber, or nothing at all. Debt had no memory. Banks did not blush. Ranger made a low sound, not quite a whine, and pressed his shoulder against Nathan's leg. Nathan lowered one hand to the dog's head, feeling the warmth beneath the thick fur. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know, boy." He did not say what both of them seemed to understand, that this place had been the last room in his life where grief still had a chair. He had come home from the army thinking he would stay a few months, help his father, sleep badly, fix a few things, then leave before Millstone could notice how much of him had gone missing. Instead, the shop had held him. The smell of motor oil and sawdust, the steady patience of old tools, his father's rough voice from under a truck saying, "Hand me the half-inch, Nate," not the 3/8, the half-inch. Little by little, the place had taught his hands to do something besides remember. A black Zatan turned onto Franklin Avenue and slowed near the curb. Behind it rolled a county vehicle and a white pickup with magnetic signs on the doors. Whitmore Property Scrivices. Nathan felt Ranger stiffen before he fully registered the arrival. The dog's ears sharpened, his tail lowered, not in fear but in attention. Nathan looked down at him, then back at the sedan as the driver's door opened. A man in a navy overcoat stepped out, smooth and polished against the gray morning, holding a leather folder beneath one arm. Grant Whitmore did not rush. Men like him never did. They arrived as if clocks belonged to them. Nathan tightened his hand on Ranger's leash, though Ranger had not moved. The old repair hall creaked in the wind behind him, the sign above the door giving one tired metallic groan, and for one strange second Nathan felt as if the building itself had taken a breath. 2 hours, he thought. 2 hours to lose the last thing with his father's fingerprints on it. Then Ranger turned his head away from the men at the curb and looked through the dusty front window of the shop, toward the shadowed rear wall, where the basement door waited under 40 years of silence. Grant Whitmore crossed the street with the calm, measured steps of a man who had never once worried that a door would be closed to him. He was 44, clean-shaven, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from private trainers rather than hard labor, with dark hair combed back so neatly it looked almost lacquered. His navy overcoat probably cost more than the furnace Nathan had patched 3 times last winter for Mrs. Dillard down on Pine Street, and his shoes shone despite the wet leaves gathering along the curb. Behind him came a county compliance officer named Marla Voss, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard held close to her chest, and 2 contractors who stayed near the pickup, pretending not to listen. Grant offered Nathan a small professional smile. Not warmth, not apology. Just the kind of smile people used when they wanted cruelty to pass as procedure. "Mr. Cole," he said, extending a hand. Nathan looked at it for half a second, then shifted the cardboard box in his arms instead. Grant let the hand fall smoothly, as if he had expected nothing else. "I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances." Nathan glanced at the foreclosure notice tucked beneath Grant's leather folder. "No, you're not." A faint crease appeared between Grant's brows, then vanished. "I understand this is emotional. That word doing a lot of work for you?" Grant inhaled through his nose, patient, polished, untouchable. "The bank has followed every legal requirement. You received notice of default in March, notice of acceleration in June, and final transfer documentation last month. We extended opportunities to resolve the balance." Nathan gave a short laugh without humor. "You mean the balance after your office tripled the late fees and buried the appeal in paperwork?" Marla Voss looked down at her clipboard. One of the contractors shifted his boots. Grant did not. "The numbers are what they are," he said, "and the property has already been conditionally purchased by Stoneway Development. They intend to preserve certain historical elements, of course." Nathan looked past him at the old repair hall, at the cracked brick, the faded sign, the grease-dark windows. "Preserve," he repeated. "That what you call taking a man's name off his own door?" Grant's mouth tightened, though his voice remained gentle enough for witnesses. "Mr. Cole, your father was respected in this town, truly. My family used this shop many times. Your family used a lot of things in this town." The sentence landed softly, but something flickered behind Grant's eyes. Not anger exactly, recognition. For the first time, Nathan noticed that Grant was not looking at the sign, or the front office, or the bay doors where the tow chains still hung from the rafters. His gaze kept slipping to the rear half of the building, toward the shadowed section where the old parts room sat behind a plywood partition, toward the place Ranger had been staring. Ranger gave another low sound, deeper now, and moved one step forward until his body stood between Nathan and Grant. The dog did not bare his teeth, he did not lunge. He simply stood there, large and still, his amber eyes fixed on Grant, with the solemn attention of something that knew the difference between a stranger and a threat. Grant looked down at him and smiled thinly. Handsome dog. He decides that for himself. Marla cleared her throat. Mr. Cole, by court order, you have until noon to remove personal items. We are here only to document the transfer. Nathan turned to her, and his expression softened a little. He could see she hated this part of her job. Some people carried shame quietly, like a folded letter in the pocket. I know, he said. I'm not trying to make your morning harder. Her eyes lifted, grateful and sad at once. Grant stepped in before the moment could become human. I'll need to accompany you inside. Liability. Nathan's hand closed around Ranger's leash. The wind nudged the repair hall sign again, making it creak above them like an old man clearing his throat. I can walk through my father's shop without supervision. Until noon, Grant said. Technically, yes. But given the age of the structure, the lower level is restricted. Stoneway's engineers flagged concerns. Nathan went still. Lower level? Grant's smile returned, careful as a locked drawer. Basements in buildings this old can be unstable. I strongly advise you not to enter any sealed area. Ranger's head snapped toward the front door. His ears lifted. His body leaned, not toward Grant this time, but toward the interior, toward something hidden beyond the office, beyond the tool racks, beyond the years Nathan had spent not asking questions. Nathan felt a slow chill climb the back of his neck. He had not mentioned a basement, not to the bank, not to Stoneway, not to anyone. His father had spoken of it only once, in a hospital room washed blue by fluorescent light, with death sitting quietly at the foot of the bed. Grant checked his watch. It's 10:17. I suggest you make this quick. Nathan looked at the man, then at Ranger, then at the old glass door of Cole & Sons Repair Hall. For a moment, he heard his father's voice as clearly as if Thomas Cole were standing beside the workbench inside. Some doors aren't locked to keep people out. They're locked to keep the truth alive. Nathan set the cardboard box carefully on the sidewalk. Come on, Ranger, he said. Let's take one last look. And when he opened the door, the smell of oil, dust, cold iron, and old secrets came rolling out to meet them. Inside Cole & Sons Repair Hall, the cold felt older than the morning outside. It sat in the corners, under the workbenches, inside the hollow mouths of empty tool drawers, waiting like something that had been holding its breath for years. Nathan stepped over the threshold slowly, and Ranger came in beside him. Quiet paws crossing the oil-dark concrete with a care that seemed almost reverent. The shop had never looked so bare. The tire racks were empty. The pegboard wall still carried the pale outlines of missing wrenches. A rectangle of cleaner brick marked where his father's old calendar had hung, forever stuck on August because Thomas Cole never remembered to turn the page. Dust floated in the weak gray light spilling through the front windows, each speck drifting lazily as if time itself had grown tired in this place. Nathan stood there with his hand on the doorframe and felt something fold inside him. He had spent years pretending the shop was just a building, just brick and pipe and invoices, just a place where people brought machines that refused to start. But without the voices, without the clang of tools, without the radio murmuring baseball scores from the office, the truth rose up plain and painful. This place had not kept engines alive. It had kept people alive. It had kept his father useful after grief hollowed him out. It had kept Nathan standing when civilian life felt too wide, too bright, too full of questions nobody knew how to ask. Ranger moved first. He did not wander toward the front counter or the old heater where he used to nap during winter afternoons. Instead, he walked past the hydraulic lift, past the shelves of labeled coffee cans filled with bolts, past a row of steel lockers dented by decades of shoulders and elbows. Nathan followed, his boots making small sounds that seemed indecent in the stillness. At the rear of the shop, behind a warped plywood partition, stood the parts room. A narrow space, low ceiling, one flickering bulb. It smelled of rubber belts, mouse dust, and old cardboard. Nathan had been back here 1,000 times. He had carried boxes through this room, stacked furnace filters, searched for alternators, hidden from well-meaning neighbors after his father's funeral. And yet, standing there now, he saw it as if for the first time. The heavy wooden door behind the tall cabinet, its edges sealed with gray caulk, its hinges painted over, its surface scarred by age. Across the upper plank, carved in his father's uneven hand, were 2 words. Not yet. Ranger sat in front of it. Not restless, not confused, waiting. Nathan's throat tightened. "No," he whispered, though he did not know whether he was speaking to the dog, the door, or the dead. The memory came without mercy. St. Agnes Medical Center, February 2021. Snow tapping at the window, his father's hand thin and dry in his. Machines sighing softly around them. Thomas Cole had been a broad man once, thick through the chest, with forearms roped from work, and a laugh that could fill the service bay. But that night he had looked small beneath the hospital blanket, reduced by illness to bone, breath, and stubborn blue eyes. "Nate," he had said, voice scraping like gravel. "There's a lower room at the shop." Nathan had tried to smile, tried to make it light. "Dad, I know. You told me never to mess with it." His father's fingers had closed around his wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me. Don't open it because you're curious. Don't open it because you're angry. Don't open it because grief makes a man want answers he can't live with." He had coughed then, turning his face away, ashamed of the weakness more than the pain. Nathan had lifted the cup to his lips. His father drank, breathed, and continued. "But if they ever come for the haul, if they come with papers and smiles and men who call stealing progress, then you open it." Nathan had stared at him, unsettled by the clarity in his voice. "Who, Dad?" Thomas Cole's eyes had moved to the window, where snow blurred the parking lot lights into pale halos. The kind of people who count a man's home by square footage and never by the names spoken inside it. Then, quieter, "Some doors aren't locked to keep people out. They're locked to keep the truth alive." Back in the parts room, Nathan pressed his palm against the carved words. Not yet. For 3 years, he had honored that warning because grief had made obedience easier than understanding. Now the bank was outside, the clock was moving, and Ranger, loyal old Ranger, had brought him to the one door his father had feared and protected in equal measure. Nathan looked down at the dog. Ranger looked back with those steady amber eyes, and Nathan felt the strange, aching sensation of being asked to become ready at the exact moment he least wanted to be. Nathan did not move at first. He stood in the stale little parts room, with his palm still pressed to the words his father had carved, feeling the grain of the old wood beneath his skin, feeling the weight of a promise that had waited 3 years to become a decision. Outside, somewhere beyond the brick walls and dust-blind windows, men with clipboards and clean boots were measuring the last hours of his family's name. Inside, there was only the soft buzz of the failing bulb, the faint tick of cooling pipes, and Ranger's steady breathing. Nathan pulled at the padlock once, not hard, just enough to hear the metal answer him with a dull, stubborn clack. The lock was old steel, spotted with rust, thick as a closed fist. His father had not meant this door to open by accident. Nathan searched the nearby shelves, moving paint cans, brittle boxes of gaskets, a crate of cracked spark plugs, and jars full of screws sorted by a logic only Thomas Cole had ever understood. Nothing. He checked the top of the cabinet, the windowsill, beneath a loose floor mat near the wall. Still nothing. A slow irritation rose in him, not really anger, but the helpless kind of heat that comes when grief leaves behind a map with half the roads missing. "Come on, Dad," he whispered. "You tell me to open it, but not where the key is." Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. The dog stood, turned away from the sealed door, and walked toward the old steel work table in the corner. It was the table Nathan's father had refused to replace. Though one leg had been welded twice and the surface was scarred with burn marks, oil rings, and decades of small repairs. Ranger lowered his nose to the floor, sniffed along the table's back legs, then gave a quiet huff and pawed once at the base. Nathan watched him, exhausted and uncertain. "What is it?" Ranger pawed again, this time with more insistence, scraping away a curl of dust. Nathan crouched slowly. His knees popped. The sound made him think absurdly of his father laughing from across the shop, telling him 42 was too young to be making old man noises. Beneath the table, partly hidden behind a strip of warped metal trim, was a rectangular plate no bigger than a deck of cards. Nathan ran his thumb along its edge. It shifted. His pulse changed. He pulled a small screwdriver from his pocket, the same one he kept out of habit more than need, and pried gently until the plate came loose with a soft metallic sigh. Behind it was a narrow hollow wrapped in black electrical tape. Nathan reached in and drew out a small cloth bundle, stiff with age. Ranger sat beside him, close enough that his shoulder touched Nathan's arm. Nathan unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a tarnished brass key, a faded military identification tag belonging to his grandfather Samuel Cole, and a folded note so thin at the creases it looked ready to turn to ash. Nathan opened it carefully. The handwriting was his father's, slanted, uneven, unmistakable. "If the bank comes before you are ready, trust the dog. He will know where grief hides." Nathan read it twice, then a third time, slower. The words did not comfort him, not exactly. They reached somewhere deeper than comfort, somewhere raw and still breathing. His father had known. Not everything, maybe. Not this exact morning, not Grant Whitmore's polished shoes on the curb, not the county vehicle idling outside like a hearse for paperwork. But Thomas Cole had known that someday the past would stop waiting politely. Nathan looked at Ranger. The old shepherd met his gaze without blinking, amber eyes calm, loyal, and almost unbearably alive. Nathan swallowed hard and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. "You've been keeping his secret too, haven't you?" Ranger exhaled through his nose, warm against Nathan's cheek. No answer, no need for one. Nathan stood, key in hand, and returned to the basement door. The brass slid into the lock with a reluctant scrape. For one terrible second it would not turn. Then Nathan adjusted his grip and felt something give inside the mechanism. A deep internal shift, like a memory unclenching. The padlock opened into his palm. He lifted it away, pulled at the old iron handle, and the sealed door groaned against its frame. Cold air breathed out from below, carrying the scent of damp concrete, paper, rust, machine oil, and something else Nathan could not name. Not decay, not danger, waiting. Ranger stepped forward before Nathan did, placing one paw on the first stair, then another, his body steady in the dark. Nathan took the flashlight from his belt, clicked it on, and aimed the beam downward. The stairs disappeared into blackness beneath the shop, narrow and steep, each step filmed with dust no living foot had disturbed in years. Behind him, faintly, Grant Whitmore's voice moved somewhere near the front office, smooth and impatient. "Mr. Cole, time is moving." Nathan looked down into the dark, then at Ranger. "So are we," he said quietly. And together man and dog descended into the room his father had locked away from the world. The stairs complained beneath Nathan's boots, each step giving off a dry wooden groan that rose into the dark and vanished there. Ranger moved ahead of him with careful certainty, his nails clicking once, then again, then disappearing into the hush below. Nathan kept one hand on the wall, feeling cold brick under his fingertips, and held the flashlight with the other. The beam shook more than he wanted it to. He told himself it was the uneven stairs. He knew better. The air grew colder as they descended, not simply basement cold, not the ordinary damp chill of a forgotten room, but a sealed kind of cold, the kind that belonged to things untouched, unspoken, unvisited. At the bottom, Nathan's light found concrete, then shelves, then steel cabinets. He stopped so suddenly Ranger turned back to look at him. This was no storage room. It was not the cluttered graveyard of broken fans, Christmas decorations, cracked paint cans, and old furnace parts he had expected. The space beneath Cole & Sons repair hall was larger than the shop above, reinforced with poured concrete walls and thick support beams darkened by age. Metal shelving units stood in careful rows. Fireproof filing cabinets lined the far wall, their drawers labeled in his father's handwriting. A drafting table sat beneath a covered lamp. Beside it were rolled maps tied with cotton string, cardboard banker's boxes stacked 6 high, 2 locked trunks, and a corkboard whose paper had yellowed at the corners but still held dozens of pinned notes, photographs, and property cards. Nathan stepped forward slowly. Dust rose around his boots like breath from the floor. "Dad," he whispered, and the words sounded too small for the room. Ranger crossed to the nearest filing cabinet and sat, not randomly, not curiously. Deliberately, Nathan shone the light across the drawer labels. Houthry, Rail Yard Homes, Veterans Block, Mill Workers Trust, Whitmore Holdings. That last one made the muscles in Nathan's jaw tighten. He opened the drawer. The metal resisted, then slid out with a whisper. Inside were folders arranged with almost painful care, each one marked by name, address, date, and a small red dot. Nathan pulled the first file. Mortgage modification agreement, late fee schedule. Notice of default, deed transfer, all from 1989. The name at the top belonged to a man Nathan vaguely remembered from childhood, a retired rail mechanic who used to bring his blue pickup in every December. and insists Thomas Cole check the heater before the first freeze. Nathan opened another folder, then another. Different names, same pattern. Fees that doubled without explanation, appraisals that undervalued homes by half, legal notices mailed to wrong addresses, buyout offers shell companies that, 2 pages later, led back to Whitmore-controlled accounts. The room seemed to tilt. Nathan set the papers down and moved to the corkboard. There, beneath a rusted thumbtack, was an old photograph of Franklin Avenue before the condos, before the coffee shop with $12 sandwiches, before strangers started calling the East Side up and coming. Men stood outside the repair hall in work coats. Women leaned against cars with tired smiles. Older veterans in ball caps sat on the curb drinking coffee from paper cups. Nathan's father stood among them, younger, broad-shouldered, alive. In the corner of the photograph, half hidden behind a delivery truck, was a young Edward Whitmore shaking hands with a bank officer. Nathan swallowed. Ranger gave a soft huff and moved toward a low steel trunk beneath the drafting table. The trunk was not locked. Inside were envelopes, account ledgers, municipal bonds, stock certificates, and a black binder marked Recovery Fund, claimed. Nathan opened it and stared at columns of numbers. His breath caught when he reached the final page. The assets had been moved, split, hidden, reinvested, and buried under layers of legal language, but the total was clear enough. Approximately $8.4 million. Not a treasure chest, not gold bars, something worse, somehow money with fingerprints on it. Money that had once been roofs, kitchens, porches, medicine, winter heat, dignity. Nathan felt anger rise, but it did not come hot. It came cold and clean, like water from a deep well. He turned another page and found a note in his father's hand. They will say these people lost because they failed. They did not fail. They were cornered. Nathan closed his eyes. Above them, faint but real, footsteps crossed the shop floor. Grant's voice called down through the building, smooth and nearer than before. "Mr. Cole, you should not be in any restricted area." Ranger stood at once, body angled toward the stairs, silent but alert. Nathan gathered the black binder against his chest and looked around the hidden archive beneath his father's shop. He understood then that the building had never been empty. It had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to remember the people the town had learned to forget. Nathan stood in the center of the hidden room with the black binder against his chest, listening to Grant Whitmore's footsteps move across the floorboards above him like a polite storm, looking for a place to break. The sound should have hurried him. It should have pushed him toward the stairs, toward confrontation, toward whatever legal language Grant had sharpened for this exact moment. Instead, Nathan found himself unable to move. The basement had changed shape around him. A minute ago, it had been a secret archive. Now it felt like a chapel built for names no one had spoken in years. Ranger padded to the corkboard and nudged a cardboard box tucked beneath it. The box was ordinary, the kind used for printer paper, its corners soft from age. On the side, in Thomas Cole's hand, were 3 words: people, not property. Nathan knelt and opened it. Inside were photographs, handwritten letters, receipts, funeral programs, union cards, military discharge papers, old newspaper clippings, and copies of thank you notes his father had never shown him. The first photograph was of an elderly couple, standing on the porch of a narrow row house, holding a basket of tomatoes between them. On the back his father had written, "Harold and June Webb, furnace repair, no charge. Lost house in 1991 after Whitmore adjustment. Both worked 37 years at the mill." Nathan picked up another. A man in a faded army jacket beside a pickup with its hood raised. Marcus Ellery, Vietnam veteran. Paid with 2 jars of peach preserves, loan sold without notice, 1993. Another photo showed 3 women in aprons outside the old diner that used to sit by the rail crossing. Another showed a group of retired miners gathered in the repair hall during a January blackout, drinking coffee while Thomas kept a space heater running from a generator. Nathan's throat ached with each name. None of them were numbers. None of them were distressed assets or non-performing accounts, or whatever clean little phrases men like Grant used to sweep people off maps. They had faces. Hands, porches, coffee mugs, old trucks, bad knees, laughs caught in photographs. Ranger lowered himself beside Nathan, his body warm against Nathan's hip. The dog's presence steadied him in a way words could not. Nathan unfolded a letter from the bottom of the box. It was addressed to his father and dated March 2016. Tom, if something happens to me before I finish this, don't let them turn grief into shame. That's how they win. They tell people losing a home means they weren't smart, weren't careful, weren't worthy. But most folks don't lose everything all at once. They lose it through fine print, through silence, through being too proud to ask for help, until help costs more than the house. Nathan read the signature twice before his mind accepted it. Samuel Cole, his grandfather. So this had not begun with his father. It had passed from one man to another like an unfinished prayer. Samuel had started collecting proof decades ago. Thomas had continued. And Nathan, who had thought himself the last broken branch of the family tree, had been brought here not to inherit money, but responsibility. On the drafting table, beneath a cracked magnifying glass, lay a cassette recorder and a stack of transcripts. Nathan turned the top page toward the flashlight. Interview with Eleanor Briggs, former clerk, Whitmore Savings, October 1998. He skimmed the lines. She had described property transfers routed through shell companies, missing notices. Elderly homeowners told to sign temporary protection agreements that became deeds. Veterans promised loan relief that never arrived. No violence, no shouting. Just signatures taken from people who trusted the wrong desk. Nathan felt the old army part of him rise, the part trained to identify the hidden structure beneath chaos. This was a system, quiet, patient, respectable. That made it worse. A single cruel man could be resisted. A system could make cruelty look like weather. Then he saw an envelope marked for Nathan if needed. His hands hesitated before opening it. The note inside was short. Son, if you're reading this, then I ran out of road before I could finish what your grandfather started. I wanted to protect you from it, but maybe protection was never the point. Maybe respect is. Respect the living enough to fight for them. Respect the dead enough to say their names. And respect yourself enough to know you were never meant to carry silence as a family tradition. Nathan pressed the paper to his lips before he knew he was doing it. Not a kiss exactly. More like holding back a sound. Above, Grant's voice came again, closer to the rear of the shop. Mr. Cole, I need you upstairs now. Ranger rose, ears forward. Nathan placed the letter carefully in the binder, then gathered the box of photographs under one arm. The anger inside him had become something quieter and steadier than rage. It had become purpose. He looked at the faces on the corkboard one last time and whispered, I know your names now. Then he turned toward the deeper part of the basement, where the light caught the edge of a narrow steel door behind the cabinets. Nathan saw the narrow steel door half hidden behind the filing cabinets, and for one breathless second, the basement seemed to rearrange itself around that discovery. The door was low, painted the same dull gray as the concrete wall, with a wheel latch instead of a handle and a strip of old weather seal curled loose at the bottom. It looked less like an exit than a forgotten utility access, the kind of thing a man might walk past for 20 years without seeing. Ranger had seen it. Of course he had. The German Shepherd moved toward it, nose close to the floor, then looked back at Nathan with a steadiness that made the hair rise along Nathan's arms. Above them, the shop floor creaked, not the vague settling of old lumber. Footsteps, measured, searching. Grant Whitmore called down again, his voice carrying through the stairwell with that polished patience men used when witnesses were near. Mr. Cole, this area was specifically restricted. You need to come back upstairs and surrender any materials you may have removed. Nathan stood still, the binder under one arm, the box of photographs against his side, his father's letter folded in his shirt pocket like a second heartbeat. Surrender, he said under his breath. It was a word that did not belong to truth. Ranger gave a low rumble, not loud enough to be called a growl, but deep enough to warn the room that the air had changed. Nathan turned off the flashlight for 1 second. Darkness swallowed him whole. Through the thin seam beneath the basement door, a pale blade of light appeared as someone opened the parts room above. Grant was closer now. Nathan could hear another voice with him, probably Marla Voss, softer, uneasy. Mr. Whitmore, he still has until noon. And he is trespassing in an unsafe section of the structure, Grant replied. If there are sensitive bank documents down there, we have an obligation to secure them. Sensitive bank documents. Nathan almost laughed. They had not even reached the truth yet, and already Grant was dressing it in a suit. Ranger pressed his body lightly against Nathan's leg, guiding him away from the stairs. It was not panic, it was decision. Nathan clicked the flashlight back on, but kept the beam low. He moved to the steel door and turned the wheel latch. It resisted at first. Rust whispered. Metal complained, then it shifted. A breath of air touched his face, colder and cleaner than the basement, threaded with the mineral smell of old stone and rainwater. Behind the door was a narrow passage, brick-lined and barely tall enough for Nathan to stand straight. Utility pipes ran along one side, wrapped in cracked insulation. A rusted rail embedded in the floor hinted at some old service track from another lifetime. Nathan remembered stories then, half-jokes his father used to tell customers when the coffee pot was full and the snow was coming down sideways. Back before trucks, parts came by rail. Back before lawyers, men knew which tunnels ran under which streets. He had thought they were stories. Most warnings sounded like stories until the day they became maps. A sharp knock came from the basement door behind them. Grant's voice lost a fraction of its smoothness. "Mr. Cole, open this door." Nathan looked at Ranger. The dog stood at the mouth of the passage, ears forward, waiting, his sable coat catching the flashlight in dull copper bands. He had not lunged at Grant. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply chosen the direction in which the truth could survive. Nathan slid the black binder inside his jacket, tucked the packet of letters into the box, and took one last look at the hidden room. The file cabinets, the maps, the faces pinned to cork, the careful evidence of 2 generations who had believed ordinary people deserved more than silence. "I'll come back for you," he whispered. Not to the papers, not only to the room, but to every name written inside it. Then he stepped into the passage and pulled the steel door almost closed behind him, leaving it open just enough so it would not latch. The tunnel was colder than he expected. Each breath came out pale. Ranger moved ahead, slow but certain, stopping every few yards to check on him. The old shepherd's discipline was not theatrical. It was tender in its own wordless way. He led as if Nathan were something worth protecting. Behind them, muffled through concrete and wood, came the sound of the basement door opening at last. Grant's voice dropped, stripped now of public charm. Find what he touched. Nathan kept walking. The passage sloped gently downward, then curved beneath Franklin Avenue. Water dripped somewhere in the dark, with the patient rhythm of a clock that had been counting longer than any foreclosure notice. His shoulder brushed brick. His knee protested. The box grew heavier. Still he kept going because above him were men who knew the price of land, and beside him was a dog who seemed to know the worth of a human name. After several minutes, the tunnel ended at a rusted grate behind the abandoned freight depot. Ranger pushed his nose through first, sniffed the air, then looked back. Nathan forced the latch, stepped into the gray daylight, and saw Millstone from an angle he had never seen before. The back of the town, the hidden side, the place where old tracks disappeared beneath weeds but never truly left. He turned once toward the repair hall. The clock on the depot wall, long stopped, read 11:04. But Nathan's phone said 10:46. He still had time, not much, enough. The abandoned freight depot smelled of wet wood, old coal dust, and rain that had been trapped in the walls for too many seasons. Nathan stepped out from behind the rusted grate with Ranger at his side and stood beneath the sagging awning, breathing hard, not from fear exactly, but from the strange pressure of carrying more than paper. The black binder under his jacket seemed to press against his ribs like a living thing. The box of photographs felt heavier than tools, heavier than debt, heavier than the folded flag in his duffel bag back on the sidewalk. Across the tracks, Millstone went on, pretending to be an ordinary town. Cars moved through damp intersections. A delivery truck backed into the alley behind the market. Somewhere, a church bell marked the half hour. Nobody knew that beneath their polished sidewalks, beneath the leasing offices and renovated storefronts, an old truth had just crawled out into daylight. Ranger shook dust from his coat, then looked up at Nathan as if waiting for the next order. Nathan glanced at his phone, 10:52. Grant would realize soon enough that he was gone. The bank would start using words like theft, breach, liability, unauthorized access. They would make the truth sound like a crime, because that was how people with power protected themselves from embarrassment. Nathan needed someone who understood both paper and pressure. There was only one name that came to him. Grace Holloway kept her office above a closed pharmacy on Mercer Street, in a narrow brick building with a green door and windows full of old case files instead of decorations. She was 58, a former Air Force JAG officer, a civil rights attorney, and one of the few people in Millstone who could make a banker, a sheriff, and a mayor all sit up straighter by simply entering a room. Nathan had met her after his father died, when she helped him file a veterans benefits appeal and refused payment beyond one black coffee and a promise that he would stop saying he was fine when he clearly was not. He reached her building through back streets, avoiding Franklin Avenue, Ranger moving close to his left knee with quiet precision. The dog drew glances from a few pedestrians, but Nathan barely saw them. His world had narrowed to the weight of the binder and the old names inside it. When he climbed the stairs to Grace's office, his hand hesitated before knocking. Some part of him still wanted to believe he had misunderstood the files, that grief had turned coincidence into conspiracy, that his father had been an old man collecting paper against loneliness. Grace opened the door before he knocked twice. She wore reading glasses low on her nose, a charcoal sweater, and the expression of a woman who had been expecting bad news most of her adult life and disliked being right. "Nathan," she said, looking from his face to the box, then to Ranger's dusty paws. "Tell me you did not come through a tunnel." Nathan gave a tired, almost broken smile. "I'd rather start with good morning," she stepped aside, "than lie to someone with less experience." Her office was warm, lined with books, service plaques, and framed photographs of veterans' clinics, housing meetings, and people standing in courthouse hallways after long fights they had nearly lost. Nathan placed the binder on her desk, then the photographs, then his father's letter. Grace did not speak while she read. That was one of her gifts. She made silence useful instead of empty. Page by page, her face changed, not dramatically, not with theatrical shock, but with the tightening stillness of a professional recognizing the shape of something ugly and organized. She read the mortgage files, the deed transfers, the shell company records, the interviews, the asset ledger. When she reached the $8.4 million recovery fund notation, she removed her glasses and set them down very carefully. "This is not just about your building," she said. Nathan sat across from her, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles paled. Ranger lay beside his chair, head up, watching Grace as if judging whether she deserved the room's trust. "I know." "No," Grace said softly. "I need you to hear me. They didn't simply take property. They converted vulnerability into revenue. Age, grief, illness, military absence, lost jobs, bad winters, unpaid medical bills. They found people at their weakest and called it opportunity." Nathan looked at the photographs spread across the desk. Harold and June Webb, Marcus Ellery, the diner women, the men in work coats. "My father kept their names." Grace's expression softened. Then he understood the most important part. She turned to her scanner, then paused and looked back at him. "Nathan, once I copy this, there is no quiet way back. The bank will try to intimidate you legally. They'll call you unstable. They'll call your father confused. They'll call this a misunderstanding wrapped in old paper." Nathan lowered his eyes to Ranger, whose tail moved once against the floor. A small, steady sound. "My father said respect was the point." Grace nodded, as if that answer had passed some private test. "Then we proceed with respect, not revenge, not noise, evidence." She began scanning the first file, then the next, sending copies to encrypted storage, a state financial investigator she trusted, and a housing nonprofit that had spent years chasing patterns no one would confirm. The machine hummed softly, feeding page after page into light. Nathan watched the names pass beneath the glass and felt, for the first time that morning, not saved, but less alone. By 11:28, Grant Whitmore arrived at Grace Holloway's office wearing the same navy overcoat, but not the same face. The polish was still there, the clean shave, the careful hair, the expensive calm arranged over him like armor. Yet something underneath had begun to show through. Not fear exactly. Fear would have made him human. This was irritation sharpened by surprise, the look of a man discovering that the floor he owned had a basement he had not been told about. Behind him stood Marla Voss, pale and silent, and a younger bank attorney named Peter Lang, who carried a tablet, 2 folders, and the stiff posture of someone paid to sound certain before knowing enough to be certain. Grace did not ask them to sit. She stood behind her desk, hands resting lightly on the wood, with Nathan on one side and Ranger on the other. The German shepherd had taken his place near Nathan's left knee. Not tense, not threatening, simply present, his amber eyes moving from Grant to the attorney and back again. Mr. Cole, Grant said, his voice smooth but thinner now. You removed documents from a restricted area of a property no longer under your control. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. The old version of himself, the man who had come home from the army with silence packed inside his chest, might have answered with anger. But the photographs on Grace's desk had changed the shape of his anger. It had faces now, and faces deserved steadier hands. That property is still mine until noon, he said. Peter Lang tapped his tablet. Possession transfers today, and any materials discovered on site belong to the secured asset unless proven otherwise. Grace smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made courtrooms nervous. That is a confident sentence, Mr. Lang. It is not a complete one. She opened a folder and slid a copy of an old trust agreement across the desk. Cole & Sons Repair Hall was designated in 1998 as a custodial site for records and assets connected to the Millstone Workers Restitution Trust. The trust was never dissolved. Northbridge Community Bank received notice of that designation when it acquired Whitmore Savings Legacy accounts in 2009. Grant's eyes dropped to the page. For the first time since Nathan had known him, he stopped performing politeness. Only for a second, but it was enough. Marla saw it too. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. Grace continued, calm as winter light. Your foreclosure filing omitted that encumbrance. It also failed to disclose potential conflicts involving Whitmore-controlled shell entities connected to the same parcels now being consolidated by Stoneway Development. These are old documents, Grant said. Unverified, incomplete, possibly irrelevant. Grace turned her monitor so he could see the screen. They are already copied, time-stamped, and forwarded to the State Financial Crimes Unit, the county recorder, and 2 housing rights organizations that have been looking for this pattern for years. Relevance will not be decided in this office. The room became very quiet. Outside the window, traffic moved through Mercer Street as if the world had no idea a century of careful forgetting had just cracked open above a closed pharmacy. Nathan placed his father's letter on the desk. His hand did not shake. My father kept those files because your family's bank took people at their weakest and taught them to call it failure. Grant's jaw worked once. You should be careful with accusations. I am being careful, Nathan said. That's why I'm saying their names instead of yours. Something passed through Grace's expression then, quick and soft, almost pride. Nathan looked at the photographs spread beside the binder. Harold and June Webb almost, Marcus Ellery, Denise Carver, Paul Nadeau, Ruth Bell. Men and women who worked, served, paid, repaired, cooked, cleaned, cared, showed up, and got pushed out by language they were never meant to understand. Grant stared at him, and Nathan saw the calculation happening. Lawsuit, exposure, delay, settlement, reputation. Not once did his eyes move to the photographs. That, more than anything, told Nathan what kind of man he was facing. I don't want revenge, Nathan said. If I did, I'd let Grace burn the whole thing down in public by dinner. Peter Lang shifted. Grace said nothing. Ranger's tail brushed the floor once. A quiet pulse in the room. Nathan continued. I want the foreclosure withdrawn. I want Cole & Sons protected as a community trust site. I want Stoneway's demolition review canceled. And I want $4.2 million placed into a restitution fund for the families named in that ledger, with independent oversight. The remaining assets stay tied to preserving the hall and funding housing and legal clinics for veterans, workers, and older homeowners in Millstone. Grant gave a humorless laugh. You think you can dictate terms? Nathan met his eyes. No, I think the truth can. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marla Voss set her clipboard on Grace's desk. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling, but clear. I need copies of everything for the county record. Grant turned toward her. Marla. She did not look at him. No, she said, not this time. Nathan felt something loosen inside him, something that had been clenched since the morning began, maybe longer. Ranger leaned against his leg, warm and steady. Grant looked around the room and finally understood. He had walked into a place where paper had become witness, and witness had become power. 3 months later, the first snow of the season fell gently over Millstone, Pennsylvania, softening the sharp edges of rooftops, rail tracks, and old regrets. Cole & Sons Repair Hall still stood on the corner of Franklin Avenue, its red bricks cleaned but not polished, its cracked front step repaired but not replaced, its faded sign restored just enough that the old letters could breathe again. Beneath it, A new wooden board had been mounted by hand. Millstone Veterans and Workers Center. Nathan had insisted the original name remain above the door. My father earned that sign, he told Grace when the committee suggested something more modern. Grace had only smiled and said, "Then let the new one stand under it, where respect belongs." The demolition trucks never came back. Stoneway Development withdrew quietly after the county opened its review. Northbridge Community Bank issued a public statement full of careful words, but the people of Millstone did not come to the center because of statements. They came because, for the first time in years, someone had built a place that looked them in the eye. Inside, the old service bay had been transformed without losing its soul. The hydraulic lift was gone, but the oil-dark concrete remained beneath a clear seal, like a scar allowed to heal without being hidden. Long tables stood where engines once hung open. Volunteers helped older homeowners read loan documents. A retired accountant came every Wednesday to explain property taxes in plain English. Grace held free legal clinics twice a month in the former parts room, the same room where Nathan had first found the words, "Not yet," carved into the door. Now that door stayed open. The basement archive had been cataloged, scanned, and protected under county supervision. The photographs from the box lined one wall upstairs, each with a name, a date, and a few simple sentences about the life behind the file. Harold and June Webb, Marcus Ellery, Ruth Bell, Denise Carver. People stopped in front of those photographs longer than Nathan expected. Some touched the frames, some cried quietly, some simply nodded, as if greeting neighbors they had not known they missed. Ranger had his own place near the entrance, a thick brown bed beside the old radiator. At 7, with gray spreading around his muzzle, and one hip slower in cold weather, he had become the center's unofficial guardian. He greeted people not with noise, but with presence, a lifted head, a steady gaze, a tail thumping once or twice when someone needed kindness more than conversation. Nathan often watched him from the coffee counter and wondered how many times a life could be saved without anyone calling it rescue. On a Friday afternoon, near closing, an older man named Walter Briggs came in carrying a folder against his chest. He wore a work coat shiny at the elbows and a cap from a steel company that no longer existed. His hands trembled slightly when he gave Nathan the folder. "My sister said my father's name might be in your records," he said. "I don't want money. I just want to know if he fought as hard as he said he did." Nathan took the folder gently. In the past, he might have rushed to answer, eager to fix what could not be fixed. Now he had learned another kind of service. He pulled out a chair, poured coffee into one of the old shop mugs, and set it before the man. Ranger rose from his bed and came over, resting his briefly against Walter's knee. The man's face folded, not into sadness exactly, but into relief so deep it looked like pain leaving the body. Nathan sat across from him and opened the archive binder. "Tell me his name," he said. Outside, snow gathered on the restored sign. Inside, the repair hall hummed softly with voices, papers, coffee, old grief, and new purpose. Nathan understood then that his father had not left him a building, or even a secret. He had left him a way to stand beside people without standing over them. For years, the basement had been a locked room beneath an old repair hall. But some rooms are not open to reveal treasure. Some are open so the forgotten can finally be seen. If this story moved you, take a second to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories about loyalty, dignity, and second chances. What moment hit you the hardest, and where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments.